What's cracking, everybody? Today we're going to talk about what coffee is, where it comes from, and how it's processed. Now, the world of coffee is so complex, so this video is going to be aimed at the beginner who doesn't know anything about coffee. It'd be a great training tool for people who are just getting into coffee on a casual level, or if you just start working in a cafe and want to know more about where the product that you're serving comes from. So first things first. Coffee is actually a fruit that grows on an evergreen shrub, and what we call the bean is actually the seed or pit of this fruit. The fruit itself is commonly referred to as a coffee cherry because it looks just like a cherry. You'll see these cherries in a variety of colors, but mostly red and yellow. Coffee grows in the tropics, so the area between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, that's where you'll find coffee. This is also known as the coffee belt. Now, while coffee can be grown elsewhere, you could buy a coffee plant and put it in your house. It's likely not going to flower or produce cherry, and if it does, it's probably not going to be that delicious. This is more of the exception rather than the rule. Fun fact, one coffee tree produces about 1 pound of roasted coffee each year. Now, there are two main commercially grown species of coffee, and that's Arabica and Robusta. Robusta is generally considered a lower quality plant. It's a hardier plant, its yield is higher, but the coffee's generally not as delicious. Arabica, on the other hand, is more fragile, the yield is generally lower, but the coffee tends to be of better quality. Now, going from Robusta to Arabica is the best first step in quality, and that's why you'll see places like Mick Cafe advertising they have 100% Arabica beans. But the reality is that not all Arabica is good. There are plenty of bad examples of Arabica, and depending on who you ask, there's some really good quality Robustas available, although this is more rare. So as a starting point, Arabica, good, Robusta, not so much. Now, within coffee, just like any other agricultural product, there's a bunch of different varieties of coffee within each species. If you've ever picked up a coffee bag and saw a name that looked really weird on it and you didn't know what it meant, that's probably the variety. Bourbon, Catoai, Caturra, SL28, Pacamara, Margot Hipe, these are all different varieties. And they all have their own unique taste characteristics. Think about it in correlation to an apple. If you go to the grocery store, you'll see a bunch of different kinds of apples. Golden Delicious, Red Delicious, Macintosh, Pink Lady, etc. They're all still apples, but they all look a little bit different and taste a little bit different. Now, in the coffee industry, it's common to identify flavor characteristics with the farm, region, and country before variety. There are some varieties that have become famous in their own right and have sort of a cult following. Geisha being the most prominent example. Okay, so we know that coffee is a fruit. It grows on an evergreen shrub in the tropics. There's a bunch of different kinds of coffee out there, but how is it processed? If what we call a coffee bean is actually the seed of this fruit, how do we get it out of there? So when you hear people talk about coffee processing, they're talking about the method used for getting that seed out of the cherry. Now, there's a few ways to do this, but the steps that we're gonna go over right now are for wash processed coffee. Wash processing is one of the more common methods of coffee processing, and it's kind of like the gold standard for coffee processing in that you have more control over the outcome of the final product than with some of the other processing methods. So the first steps are picking and sorting. You have to get the cherry off the tree. Now, just like any other fruit, coffee ripens at different rates. So on any given coffee shrub, you might have bright, ripe red cherries, green underripe cherries, and even some that are overripe that are starting to kind of shrivel up, and everything in between. So you want to do selective picking to only get ripe cherries. After coffee's picked, it's usually sorted again, whether with a density sorter or sorted by hand to further whittle down and control quality. Now we can go about getting that seed out of the cherry. So the first step is depulping it. A depulper is this machine which strips the skin and some of the mucilage off of the cherry. There's depulpers of varying sizes, and it's basically like this wheel that's almost got these cheese grater-like teeth off of it, and it goes in and just rips that skin off. Now what you're left with is this coffee seed that's covered with this sticky mucilage-y stuff. This is then sent to a fermentation tank. Now, fermentation tank looks just like a swimming pool, basically. And just like the depulper, there's tanks of various sizes ranging from full swimming pool sized things to just something that looks more like a hot tub. The water reacts with some of the enzymes in the coffee and helps break down that remaining mucilage. After the coffee's done with the fermentation tank, it's laid out to dry to lower its moisture content. Sometimes this is done on a patio, sometimes it's done on a raised screen bed. While the coffee's being dried, it gets raked and turned in order to provide even exposure to air to prevent mold or any funky fermenty stuff from happening. Now, even though the mucilage has been broken down in the fermentation tank, there's still this thin layer of parchment over the coffee bean. Think about when you crack open a peanut and there's still this little thin layer of skin on the actual nut itself. That's kind of what coffee parchment is like. So the last main step in processing is to hull that parchment off. Coffee goes in the dehauler, it gets agitated and shaken up, and basically the parchment is removed from the seed or the bean. Now this dehulling stage is known as dry milling, while the depulping and fermentation tank stage is known as wet milling. Sometimes they're done at the same place, sometimes they're not. It can be complicated. We'll talk more about it later, I promise. So to recap the processing, coffee's picked and sorted. It's sent to the depulper where the skin and some of the mucilage is ripped off. It then goes to the fermentation tank, which breaks down the remaining mucilage. Then set out to dry either on a patio or a raised screen bed to lower the moisture content. At this point, it's still got this thin layer of parchment on the bean, so it's sent to the dry mill where it's dehulled, and now you have this beautiful, magical coffee bean. And oh yeah, before it's roasted, it's green. It's not brown, which is a mind melter for some people. This is just one method of processing. There's other methods. There's natural processing, there's honey or semi-washed. It can get pretty deep. Coffee is really complex. There's a lot of things that need to happen before the coffee even ends up in the country where it's going to be roasted and consumed in. And at every step along the way, there's an opportunity for something to go wrong and ruin the quality of the coffee. And this isn't even talking about the quality of the plant or the soil or the region or any of that. That's still a factor too. And that, my friends, are the basics of what coffee is, where it comes from, and how it's processed. If you love this video, share it with your squad. I know every time I talk to people about this, there's something in there that's kind of like a mind melter for them. Coffee is something we really take for granted. It's one of the most common things. Everybody drinks coffee. People are loving coffee. Not a lot of people know where it comes from. If you want to use this video for training, go ahead and do it. Share the love, stay dialed, and I will catch you on the flip side. Peace.